Good morning everybody, this is Victoria. Welcome back to another episode of Art Tutorials. So today what we're actually going to work on together is something new, something special. So we are going to learn how to draw a realistic portrait and in a step-by-step process. So I'll kind of show you guys how I started off the drawing with the sketch and how to draw the construction, and then later on we will kind of learn how to clean up the constructions with the leftover pencil lines that we don't need anymore, and then fill it in with hatching and shading. I had a few students that were asking about a portrait drawing tutorial, so now I finally made it. And then our special guest today is Wednesday from the new TV series, and a lot of people love this brand new series, and one of my students, this is her favorite show, so I want to use this as a fun experience to kind of learn how to draw a portrait and also drawing our favorite character as well. This video is actually going to be broken up into two parts. So the first part is going to be the drawing construction, and then the second part will be where we kind of clean the construction lines and also start applying and adding hatching, shading, and kind of actually filling everything in and making it look like a realistic portrait drawing. And for those who are completely new to this art YouTube channel, my name is Victoria and I am a self-taught fine art artist, illustrator, and I am also an art teacher that creates these fun tutorials and drawing processes and also drawing exercises and constructions to help my students and then those who loves to draw and paint improve their drawing and painting skills. Okay, so if you guys are ready, let's get started with part number 1 of this portrait drawing tutorial. Let's get started! Okay, so first thing that we'll need here for today is we need some art materials so that we have something to draw on. So first thing is that we need some type of durable paper. So you can use sketch paper though, but I would recommend something a little bit thicker because we are adding quite a bit of layers to build on the shadows. So what's going to happen is that I'm going to show you what paper I use, which is a Canson Bristol paper. So this one is slightly bit different from the Strathmore one. It's still very good. I'm actually just trying to finish off the Canson papers before I actually go back to the Strathmore because I just wanted to try out how this paper works. It's actually still pretty decent though, but the colored pencils doesn't come out as well on this paper, so I would actually use this specifically for pencil drawings because pencil tends to work a little bit easier and it's less picky than Crayola color pencils. So I use this Bristol paper. It is a 11 by 14 inches, so it's quite a big piece of paper, and then that way it would make sure that we have sufficient amount of space so that we can add all the details that we need in this portrait drawing. So once we have the paper, next thing we want to do here is that we want to have a variety of different pencils. So I usually use a HB for any of the lighter colors and also a 2B, and if I need anything darker you can also use a 4B, a 6B, or 8B. So the higher the numbers on the B's, the softer the pencil it is and the darker it goes. So I like to have a variety of that. I'm not a big fan of using too light of a pencil, so like any of the H's I usually try not to touch. I just use the HBs as my lightest pencil. You can either pick a traditional pencil or a mechanical pencil. They both work. I just use mechanical pencil just because it's a lot quicker to finish the drawing because I don't have to go back and sharpen all the time though, but sometimes I do have to use the traditional ones because the mechanical pencils can only go so dark. So I have a mechanical pencil that has 2B lead in it, and then the other one has just regular HB lead in it. Next thing we're also going to do here is that we need something to blend our drawing with. So you can definitely use your fingers, but I would definitely also recommend something that's a little bit more neater and more tidier. So you could get soft watercolor brushes or synthetic brushes to use as a blender. So you can get like a small one, a big one, both of them work, and then we would also need a eraser two types of eraser. So there's the regular eraser, and then there's also going to be the kneadable eraser, which were mostly used during the hatching and shading though, but you can also use this in the construction part because you can actually mold and knead the eraser itself to a very fine point to erase detailed parts. So that's one of the good benefits of the kneadable eraser. Okay, and once we have all those art materials, let's get started with step number 1. So first thing we want to take a look at is what is the biggest large shape that we have in step number 1. So we have a rectangle, and we will also kind of divide it into half vertically and horizontally. So that's going to be the first step that we're going to do, and what we're actually going to draw first is to kind of generally find the placement of how large the head is going to be, or like how large the portrait is going to be, and making sure that everything fits on the piece of paper. So I am going to go ahead and kind of measure so that we have our rectangle over here, and then making sure that all of the lines are straight and also level, so make sure that they're perfectly horizontal and vertical, so it's not tilting either ways, and make sure it's straight. And once we have that, then we're going to connect all 4 corners over here and create our rectangle. So when it comes to measuring this rectangle, you can actually go ahead and double check just to see how wide it is compared to the height, and then that way you would actually get the correct proportions of your rectangle. Now feel free to readjust the rectangle if you find that the rectangle is slightly bit too small on the paper. So the key idea is that first you want to make sure that the whole rectangle fits on the paper, and then the second thing is that if you find that's slightly bit too small, because we will be adding a lot more details into this portrait, you probably want to make it a little bit bigger. So that's what I'm currently doing right now. So I'm actually making it just a teeny bit bigger, and when you're resizing, make sure that you don't just resize partially the rectangle. You want to make sure that you kind of move or shift or kind of make it slightly bit bigger on all 4 sides, so that it doesn't you don't lose the proportions there. So once we have our rectangle ready, next thing we want to do here is we want to divide it into half vertically and also horizontally. So what we're going to do first is that we are going to draw a little dash at the center so that we can kind of take a look and see where it's going to be placed. So approximately where the center is going to be, and then once we have that, we're going to double check and we're going to measure both sides just to kind of see if it's the same proportions. So once we have that and then we're happy with it, then we can go ahead and also probably draw. You can also copy and paste the top part to the bottom part so that you have the exact same measurements, and all you have to do is just connect the dots or connect the dashes. And then now we're going to do the horizontal center line over here. So it's the same idea. We're going to kind of try to guess, or approximately kind of guess where it is, and we're going to draw the dash. We're going to measure, and as you can see, it was slightly a bit too tall, so now I'm going to move that dash a little bit lower. And once we find the right place, yeah, sometimes it's a little bit finicky sometimes. But yeah, once we have like that, once we find the perfect spot for it, and then we're done with all the measuring, then we can also go ahead and copy and paste this one and also draw a line all the way across to the other side. And make sure to erase your old lines so that you don't get confused, because you're going to get more and more lines as we continue on forwards with the steps of the construction. So once we have that, I'm going to copy and paste, and we have our dash lines there, and then all that we have left here is just to kind of connect them and also double check them later just in case. But yeah. Okay, so just go ahead and draw the lines over, and then we are good to go. Oh, and also quick tip and advice, make sure that you keep the lines very light. So as you can see, I'm actually going over the same line a couple of times because I'm always putting very little pressure on it. I'm just going over just to make it darker, but not necessarily making, like, putting too much pressure into the paper, because we will be erasing these lines after when we finish the construction. So keep that in mind. Don't draw too hard on the paper, because then you're gonna have a hard time removing those lines later on, because in a realistic portraits there is no harsh outline, and majority of it is pretty soft, and there's barely any outline left after when we fill in the hatching and shading. Now let's take a look at what we have in step number 2. So basically we see 2 new lines, and then these are these 2 vertical lines over here. So we want to make sure that we measure and kind of see where these lines are placed. So as you can see, this one on the left over here, it's a little bit wider on the right side. So you kind of see where my finger is kind of outside of the box. So that means that this size over here, or this proportion over here, is a little bit wider. And as you can see, this one is also wider than the other one. So they are not the same. So we want to keep in mind of those proportions when we draw it on our drawing right now. So let's go ahead and apply that. And always make sure to draw your dashes first before you actually draw the whole vertical line, because if you drew the whole vertical line first and it's not the correct placement, then you have to erase the whole line again. So doing a little dash is very convenient because it's so small, and you would have you'll feel less lazy of correcting it, because making sure that each proportion is correct is very important. So you want to make sure that you don't get discouraged of correcting just because you have to do more work, which is basically erasing the whole vertical line though. So if you just draw a little dash, that would be really helpful, because then you can kind of correct it to the point where it's the perfect placement there. And then once you're happy with the placement, then you can go ahead and draw your vertical line downwards, and you can also double check so that it's the same all the way, like the same size all the way down, because sometimes the lines may bend or kind of deform midway, so that's something to keep in mind. Okay, now once we're done with step number 2, we're going to go ahead and move on to step number 3, which is the next step over here. So the key idea for this one is, as you can see, we have 3 new lines. So majority of them are all horizontal. So just the top one, the bottom one, and then there's also the middle one. So I'm going to kind of measure just to see how tall or how long it is compared to the width. So there should be some kind of proportions that's close enough. So if you can't find any proportions that's exact, then you can actually just make sure that the width is slightly a bit taller, and then just make sure that you have that little extra space at the top. So then you would actually get how wide it is. So since we just pre-measured and kind of checked out how wide it is and what the proportions are, now we can go ahead and draw it on our actual drawing over here. So I'm going to start with the top line over here. So that one I would probably just eyeball it, and usually you would want to make sure that it has like enough space so it's not too big or not too small. So it matches with the proportions that we see on the drawing construction. And then once we have that, and then we kind of double check that it's leveled, so it's not kind of dipping or kind of creating like a curve at the top and having it grow a hill or anything, make sure that it's leveled. And then once we have that, then we can go ahead and draw the other spots. So basically make sure that you kind of measure and compare it to the other guidelines that we already have. So we already have proportions over here, and then basically you can also do it that way, or you can also kind of measure it so that you kind of see how many of the vertical ones you can actually fit in the drawing. So that's also another method and technique to find the proportions. And once you're happy with that, you can go ahead and draw your horizontal line, and then once you have that, then we are going to move down to the bottom one, and we're going to do something very similar. So it's a good habit to kind of estimate before you actually double check and measure just to see if it's the correct proportion, because then that way it helps your eyes to kind of train it to be able to see spacing and also placement of lines. So once you have that little dash there and you're like, okay, this looks about right, and then you double check just to see. And then if it's good, then you can go ahead and draw the line all the way over to the right side, but if it's not, then you can adjust the little dash and then double check again, and then you draw the line at the bottom. And then once we're done with this one, then we are going to go ahead and move on to step number 4, which is our next step. And then in this step, we are actually going to add a little bit more diagonal lines now. So we're kind of more or less done with the horizontal and vertical lines. So as you can see over here, we kind of see a little bit of the shapes of the face and also a little bit of the clothing and the shoulders. So the key idea of this one is that you want to make sure that you kind of create the negative shape over here. So these triangles. So there's a lot of negative shape here that you can use, and as long as you can actually copy that and replicate that on your drawing, then you can actually find the correct placement for the line that we are going to draw. So let's go ahead and start with the diagonal lines that are on the face over here, so basically the chin area. So we're going to find our points, so you can actually do the connect the dots method of drawing this. So as long as you kind of see where the dot is placed from top to bottom, and also where it's placed from left to right for the bottom base line over there, then you can actually just draw those two places and connect them. And I would actually reinforce it with the negative shape. So I'm more of a shape viewing person, so I kind of see the shapes a lot easier than just kind of finding the exact placement of the dot. So you might be a little bit better at connecting the dots, or you can also be similar where you kind of see the shapes a lot better. So you can actually use both techniques to kind of help you out and try to find the placement of the diagonal lines that we're drawing. So we got 1, 2, 3, and let's go ahead and do the fourth one once we're done with the third one. And once we have that, then we can also move down towards the left shoulder. So for the shoulder area, let's go ahead and start with the top diagonal line. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to also kind of try to connect the dots over here and trying to find the measurement. So like the top dash is slightly a bit higher than the one on the right side. So once you draw that line, as you can see, it's kind of slanting downwards towards the bottom right. And then once we have that, then we're going to move on to the next diagonal line, which is the one below it. So as you can see, this one is very important. So depending on like which line do we draw first? So that's a very common question that a lot of students ask. And the key idea is that if you have any line that leans on another line, then basically you should draw the other line that's leaning against the guidelines. So basically this line that we're drawing right now, so this one is leaning on the diagonal line that we have at the top, and then the top one is actually leaning on the other diagonal line that we have, and that one's just leaning on the vertical lines that we already have. So basically you want to make sure that you have an existing line that you can actually draw and lean on, and not have it just suddenly levitating, because you don't want to draw a shape or a line that is just in midair, because you have nothing to compare to, right? So, and also nothing to close off the shape so you can actually see the negative shape either. So this way it would be an easier way to organize everything. So now let's go ahead and move on to step number 5. So here we have more diagonal lines. There's a lot of lines at the top there. So we want to make sure that we kind of go one section at a time. So I would probably draw these lines first, and then these ones, this one, and then making sure that you kind of see where this line, you have the other lines on the left leaning on that large one. So now we can go ahead and draw our first line over here. So the first diagonal line over here is the one at the very top. It's quite a large one, so we're going to go ahead and find the placement of this line. And then once we have that, Then we can go ahead and double check just to see if it's the correct measurement, and then once we have that, then we can go ahead and confirm that this line is the correct one, and then we shall move on to the next line over here on the right, which is that other big one I was talking about. So this line we would draw first before we draw any of the smaller lines that were on the left, because those lines are leaning on this big one. So let's go ahead and draw this one. And then once we have this one, I'm kind of like jumping a little bit all over the place though, but once we draw this larger line, then we can also double check just to see how big this negative shape is on both sides. So as you can see, the right side is a lot bigger than the one on the left. So some things to help you double check and just kind of see if the shape is right, if the line is at the right placement. And then now we're gonna go move to the left side again. So we're gonna go ahead and try to connect the dots there and kind of see whether if that's the correct placement. And then once we're happy with that, then we can go ahead and draw our diagonal line there, and making sure that you double check the measurement and seeing if it's the right spacing. But yeah. And next we're gonna add the last diagonal line at the very bottom over here on the left side. So once we kind of finish off the left side of the drawing for most of the diagonal lines, then we can actually go ahead and move on to the right side now. So what we're going to do here is that we're gonna go ahead and draw our next large diagonal line over here, and then once we have that, we would have some lines to lean on. So this would be, again, the first line that you would draw before we actually draw the other smaller diagonal line that's actually leaning onto it. So we're gonna go ahead and draw this one, and then make sure you kind of measure just to see what the proportions are. So as you can see, the left side is a lot taller than the right side, and then we also have another diagonal line that connects with this one over here, and it kind of stops pretty much at the tip there before it kind of goes back and touches the main diagonal line there. So like this part is pretty much about the same height, so you can actually draw more horizontal lines even though if it's not on the construction itself. Feel free to add more guidelines just to help you out and kind of find the placement of each point and line. Okay, so once we have majority of this, now we're gonna add these smaller diagonal lines I was mentioning that's going to lean on the big one that's on the right side. And then we're gonna measure just to see where each point is going to be, and then we can go ahead and connect the dots and also double check the negative shape just to kind of see how the shape looks and whether if it's the same shape, the same negative shape. And once we have that, we're going to do some last double checking just to make sure that it is the right spacing and right placement. Then we are done with step number 5, and we are going to move on to step number 6 now. So here, as you can see, we have more facial features. So we have like the placement where the eyes are, the mouth, the nose, and all that. So we're going to go ahead and find the measurement and placement since we already pre-measured on our drawing example. So we are going to go ahead and find the eye line. So that's going to be the base of the eye line. Yeah. So once we have that, we're going to do some more double checking before we actually move on to the lower horizontal line, which is basically the placement of the lips and the mouth. So we're going to correct a little bit so that we make sure that this line is horizontal, and then now we're going to go ahead and move on to this baseline over here at the bottom. So we're going to kind of double check and measure and compare the proportions at the top to the bottom, and we are going to find our line over here. And then once we have that, we make sure and double check that it is the same height on both sides. And then now we're going to go ahead and find the placement of the nose. So I'm going to do these dots or connect the dots there. Going to measure just to see if it's the right placement. And then once we have that, we're going to compare proportions and we are going to go ahead and draw that diagonal line once we are happy with the placement of the dashes. And we're going to do a similar thing with the other side of the nose, same idea. So you can actually use a lot of the proportions and shapes around that we already have, just to kind of compare and see how big the spacing is for the nose and all that. Okay, so now once we have all that done, then we're just also going to kind of block out the ear over here on the right side. So we're going to go ahead and draw our last few lines for this step, and then once we have that done, then we're going to move on to the next step. So in step number 7, as you can see, we have a lot more facial features, mostly on the nose and also details, and we're also adding the lips over here. So what we're going to do here is that you want to make sure that when we start off on the nose and the lips over here, we're going to go ahead and kind of see the negative spacing, which what I usually like to do, and also just kind of connect the dots. So this line over here is pretty much horizontal, and then once we have that, we're gonna double check to see if it's the right side, and once that's good to go, then we will actually start adding the next line up. So basically it kind of goes out a little bit before it reaches diagonally to the edge. So that's basically like the shadow part of the nose, and then now we're going to go ahead and find the placement of this diagonal line over here. Double check the negative shape, remember to do that, and then once you have that, then we can go ahead and double check to see if that point is at the right placement, and if it is, then we can go ahead and draw the next line over here. But yeah, so like the key idea is just to kind of go one step at a time and making sure that you have one line placed correctly, and then as you build and add more lines on top of it, everything's going to set in place. And if some lines don't set in place, then you can always backtrack it and just kind of see, okay, this spacing looks good, what about the other spacings? So it's not necessarily meaning that if you kind of see something that doesn't fit, it had to be like the line that you're currently drawing or the line before. It could be something that's even more like beyond the previous steps. So make sure you kind of be mindful and open and looking at the surrounding spacing, and just kind of seeing where this line is placed and how far or spaced out it is between other lines around it. And once we have that, we're going to do the last few lines for the lips over here, and then once we have that, then we can go ahead and move on to the next step, which is step number 8. So we're kind of getting a lot more into details now. So in this step, as you can see, we have more of the eyes and also the surroundings. So there's hairlines, and then just also more at the bottom, so we see a little bit more of the placement of the clothing. So now as we kind of start drawing this area, since we finished with the previous step over here, which is the nose and the mouth, we're gonna add a slightly bit more details on the inside to make it kind of fleshed out and blocked out, because we kind of still need to know where the nostrils and everything are. So we're going to go ahead and draw those, and then also the lip parting too. So we're going to go ahead and do the lip parting over here, and since it's like smaller areas, I usually just eyeball it. I don't measure these smaller parts anymore, unless if I really needed to, because it looked a little weird. But usually as I take a look at it, it's pretty obvious just to see where it is a little bit too big or where it's a little bit too small. And since we're pretty much done with the lips and the nose here, let's go ahead and kind of work a little bit on the hairline over here. So we're going to start on this larger diagonal line on the left side over here, and then we're going to try to find the placement and then be aware of the negative shapes around. And then once we have this placement, then we are going to go ahead and find the placement of the other 2 diagonal lines over here. So as you can see, like since we are drawing a lot more and we're adding more and more lines, space is kind of closing off quite a bit. So from here on out, usually we already have majority of the main lines, and it's easier to kind of find the placement because we have so many different negative shapes to compare to, and also spacing around each line, because this line you don't want it to be too close to the base horizontal line, but at the same time you don't want it to be too tall, so it's easier to kind of see around because we have so many lines to compare to. So let's go ahead and actually move down now to the bottom left side of portrait here, and we are going to start kind of adding a little bit more details to the clothing here. So it's more of the collar area, and then we're going to go ahead and add this diagonal line over here next. And once we kind of finish up this part, then we're probably going to go and work on the eyes next. So we're going to try to find the placement of all the extra detailed lines for the eyes. So let's go ahead and start with the right eye. Okay, so with the right eye over here, what we're going to do is that we're going to find the correct placement, make sure you double check and measure and comparing it to other spacing. So as you can see, that top part over there, which is closer to the eyebrow line, that one is the same size as the spacing between the bottom part of the nose. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. Then we're gonna draw the other lines here. So this one, pay attention to the different lines, because there are lines that seem like they are just one line though, but they're actually three different angles, 2 or 3 different angles. So just keep in mind to make sure you kind of zoom in on the drawing example so that you kind of take a look and see how many actual lines there are. So make sure you take a closer look at that before you draw, or like if you drew it but then later on if you take a look and you're like, oh wait, there's this is not one line, this is 2 lines, then you just kind of go back and correct it. So, and once we're done with the right eye, we're gonna move on to the left eye. So the same idea. So basically this is the eyebrow, the boxing and the layout of the eyebrows, so we know where the placement of the eyebrows are once we start filling in with hatching and shading. And then we're also going to draw the eyes, or the eye over here on the left side, and then just kind of blocking everything out. So like the process is pretty much the same thing, just go one line at a time, so then that way you don't get overwhelmed or anything. And then once we're done with that, then we can actually move down and add the last bit of the clothing area for this bottom part. Yeah, this part consists of the collar, I believe, and also just like the designs of her clothing and where everything's placed. And we're also going to draw the neck as well, because we see a little bit more of the right side of the neck than we do the left side. So we're going to go ahead and draw these diagonal lines so that we find the correct placements, and then once everything is ready, then we can go ahead and move on to the next step. So we're still in the collar part. We're going to probably move up very soon to where the neck is, and then we're going to add more details coming up in the next step. Now we're going to add 2 last lines for this step, and we're going to add this one first, and then after that, once we double check and measure everything and everything's good to go, then we can go ahead and add that last neck line over here, and then we're good to go. Okay, so for step number 9 over here, we have a few more straight lines before we actually start curving the lines so that we have more organic shapes, so that looks more like the portrait and the face. So we're gonna go ahead and start with this one. So it's the same idea with all the other steps over here. You want to make sure you have this line placed here. It's more or less at the center, but probably a little bit shifted more to the left side. So we're going to make sure that we have this placed correctly. You can use either connect the dots to double check, or you can also use the negative shape to double check. And once we have that, we can actually go ahead and extend this line just a bit lower so that we can kind of create this diamond shaped, or kind of like a triangle though, but it's more or less diamond shaped here, and then making sure that the point at the bottom is a lot lower than the line or the spot on the left side. So once we finish adjusting this, then we are going to go ahead and start working on the left eye and also moving higher on the portrait. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to draw this diagonal line. So that one is actually not a horizontal line, it's a diagonal line, and that kind of basically tells us where the edge of the bangs are. So that's what that guideline is. And once we have that, then we can go ahead and start working a little bit on the forehead over here, which this line over here is also part of the bangs, the guideline for the bangs. And once we have that, make sure to go back and double check just to see if the spacing is correct. And then once we have that, then we are now going to move down to the eye over here. So this one is a small enough space that you can technically just eyeball it, but if you need help, you can feel free to kind of measure and compare it with other spacings around it just to see if there's any other size or shapes that are the same proportion as this part. And we're just gonna add those in, and after this one we have a little bit of straight lines in the right eye as well, and then once we're done with that, then we can go ahead and move on to the next step. Okay, so now all the straight lines are all done, and then now we're ready to actually start curving some lines. So basically how the curved lines work is that they kind of lean on the straight lines that we have, so the guidelines that we drew for the first 9 steps. And then now for step number 10, what we're going to do here is that we're going to go ahead and add these curved lines so that it makes it look more natural, more organic, more like the human face. So we're gonna go ahead and follow this one step at a time. So you want to make sure that you follow it little by little, so then that way you don't get lost, and then you also pay attention to all the curves and bending and all that stuff so that it matches with the construction example. Now make sure you want to take more attention, or pay more attention, sorry, to to the negative shape here, because that is the most helpful method to kind of find if it's the correct placement for the line. So currently we're drawing the chin right now, and basically what happens is that the chin isn't like that perfect, it's not that straight, and then the angles aren't as sharp. So we're basically curving a lot of the corners so that it smooths out. And then what happens with this one is that we have some kind of curved bottom or curved top of a triangle. So it's straight on the other two sides because they were the old guidelines with the straight lines, and now we added this new one which is curving kind of outwards, so that kind of represents the shape of the chin. So once we have that, then we are going to fill in and draw the last few guidelines or the curved lines over here for the side of the face, and then also a little bit of the bangs over here. So now that we are done with step number 10, step number 11 over here, we are doing the hairline. So it's most of the outside hairline and also the bangs. So what we're actually going to do here is that let's start from the left side over here, and then we're gonna actually start drawing the left ear, because we already have the right ear part of the straight lines and construction from a few steps earlier, and now we're actually going to add the curved lines over here. So what you could do is that you can actually draw an imaginary horizontal line, and this is basically where this part kind of starts curving. So basically each place that starts curving, there is a specific spot that curves, so it kind of bends in and it goes out, and it bends back in again and it goes out. So pay a lot of attention to this, and as you can see, all of the curved lines are kind of turning around the straight diagonal line that we have here. So that's what that guideline was for. It was just to kind of tell us which spot of the hair is actually going out on the outside of the line, and then some that kind of just curve inwards. So it's the same idea of all the other guidelines, so make sure you kind of pay attention. You can zoom in into the picture or like the drawing reference, so you can actually see a lot better on where to actually start curving, and then if there is any negative space in between so that you catch every single little detail. So now we're going to try to curve a little bit of the outside of the ear and also a little bit of the inside shapes of the ear as well. And once we're done with that, then we're going to go up to the forehead area so that we can actually start filling in or curving the lines for the bangs. So I'm going to probably zoom in just a little bit so you guys can see a little bit better of how I actually add and draw the curved lines over here. So you want to make sure that we're going to leave enough space there and it actually doesn't touch the very top, right? And as you can see, this side, the left side, it kind of goes out and beyond the guideline and it comes back in again, and it's going to curve here so that it touches and sits on this line over here. So like it should be pretty straightforward as long as you kind of pay attention to where it curves, when it or where it starts and where it ends, then you should find the correct placement for all these curved lines. And we're gonna add this one coming up next. So as you can see, this one is also kind of leaning towards the left side, and then this one as well. So once we finish drawing all these curved lines from this step, then we can go ahead and move on to the next step. Okay, so step number 12 is also mostly hairline as well. It's more of the details and a little bit more of the separate strands. So we are going to go ahead and add these strands over here and pay attention that these strands stay within the guidelines there, so it doesn't go out too much and it doesn't become too wide. So let's go ahead and start with the top part and the leftover curved lines that we have for the bangs, and then once we're done with that, then we can actually go ahead and move downwards. So we have 2 lines there, and basically you want to make sure that you have enough spacing so everything fits. And if you suddenly find that there are certain things that you can't fit in, that means that some of the old guidelines weren't exactly at the right spot. And here we go, we start a little bit on the first curved line over here, and this is the center one. So after that one, we will also draw another one on the right side. And then once we have that, there also is another one on the left side. So you can actually draw either one first. It doesn't matter as much because you're going to draw everything anyways. And in step number 13 is mostly the clothing outline. So we're going to go ahead and add the curved lines for the clothing. And we will curve lines one section at a time so that we don't forget to actually draw any of the curved lines. So I usually like to start from the left and then move towards the right side. And as you can see, these curved lines also follow the old guidelines that we added in the previous construction steps. So make sure you kind of pay attention to the negative shape. Where does it start? Where does it curve up? Where does it curve down? And then it kind of curves in and out and it goes back down again. So these are the important stuff that you want to keep in mind. And feel free to kind of erase and correct as you please though. So once we have that part over here, then we're going to go ahead and draw the collar of her clothing over here, and we're going to add some of these curved details, and once we have that, we are going to move more towards the right side. And also feel free to kind of break the lines apart, because sometimes if the lines are too long, you can actually stitch two together so you don't actually have to draw the entire line in one stroke. Okay, so now let's start moving on to the left side. We'll get the fold over here done. So basically we have most of the curved lines kind of following that one diagonal line that we did earlier on. So basically, as you can see the different parts of the curved lines. Some will actually go under, some will actually go on top, and then we'll also here add the button. So more or less the placement of the button, and then also next we're going to do some slight more details for the right side of the clothing. So just keep in mind that take a look at the negative shape, because that's the most helpful method of trying to find the placement of the line that you're drawing. So I would recommend using the negative shape to help you out. Okay, next up is step number 14. So here we're mostly concentrating on the eyes. So we're actually having the contour of the eyes over here. So a lot of it merges with the straight line that we used to have, and then also some just kind of curve on the outside. So keep in mind that we want to make sure that whichever place is leaning on the old straight line, and then some that would actually come out and go back in a little bit. So for example, this eye bag over here, and also this part, which is technically like the shadow of the eyelash. So we are going to kind of lightly draw those, and then make sure you kind of keep the lines light still, because we will kind of erase them later on before we actually fill in the hatching and the shadows and the shading. And over here, the eyelid itself doesn't have like a guideline, so basically what you want to do here is that you probably want to put it more or less at the center of the spacing between the eyebrows and the eye line. And now in step number 15, what we're going to do here is we're going to add more of the curved lines for the eyebrows and also the curved lines for the nose. So you actually can see the contour of the nose a lot better now. So what we're going to do here is that let's start with the eyebrows first. So we're going to go ahead and kind of curve the lines for the eyebrows over here, and what we're going to do is making sure that it follows the guidelines that we used to have. So there's a lot of merging lines that's happening here. The top kind of goes a little bit higher than that horizontal line there, so we're going to want to make sure that we add that in. And then also we're going to do something similar with the other eyebrow as well. And for the nose, same idea. You want to make sure that you have the curved lines follow the old diagonal and straight lines, and just kind of pay attention to the drawing example. If you need to zoom in, I would recommend zooming in if you can't see it very clearly, but at the same time, once you zoom in, keep in mind that the example could be bigger than the drawing that you're working on, so that one definitely you don't want it to make the spacing the same size as the zoomed in version of the drawing example. So here we are on our last step, which is step number 16. So as you can see here, we are adding more of the detailed lines on the side of the face. So majority of these lines are guidelines for the shadow. So make sure you keep these lines really light because we don't want any type of hard border for these. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to go ahead and work on the side shadows over here on the side of the face so that we kind of can see where the super dark shadows start and end. So now we're gonna work more or less around the mouth area, so we can add some shadow lines over here, and then we'll also add some more details at the top part of the upper lip, or above it. And we'll also kind of add a little bit more of the highlights on the bottom lip so that we can kind of show you where the highlights start and ends and kind of divide the different parts of the lips, so it would be easier for us to kind of fill in our hatching and our shading. So we're gonna go ahead and add our last few lines for this construction drawing, and then after this we would be all done. And once we have that, we're gonna double check just to see if we missed any of the lines, and then if we are good, then we are done. Woo! So we finished our construction. Congratulations everybody, good job! And that's it for today. So that was quite the long video though, but I hope you guys learned how to start off a portrait drawing, and then this is just the beginning, so this is just part 1. Make sure you come back next week to check out the next part, so part 2 of how to draw a realistic portrait drawing, and then that way we'll actually jump into a little bit on how do we clean the construction lines, like any of the lines that we don't need anymore, and also how to fill in the shading and hatching together to make it look nice and realistic. So yeah, awesome. So there is the drawing construction, or the drawing example that I used and created for you guys, and you can actually download that below in the description. So please download that, and then that way you can help you practice to draw this particular portrait that we did together here today, and have fun just kind of like learning and trying out new methods, and just kind of making sure that you use the new techniques that you learn in measuring, and also just being observant of the placement of the lines and where do the lines start, and also the surroundings and how shapes are created. So yeah, I think so that's pretty much it. So yeah, you can click the link below to get your drawing construction, and then I'm super excited to share with you the next step next week with how to clean up the construction, and also starting to do a little bit of shading to make it look realistic. So yeah, awesome. If you guys like this video, please remember to subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like these in the future, and please remember to also click the like button if you like this video, and also please do comment below if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to help you out. And yeah, and also if you like more constructions like these, there's more simpler ones, and then there's also more challenging ones like this portrait drawing. So you can actually sign up to my Patreon. There's 2 tiers that you can sign up to. You can either sign up to Student Fuzz tier, or you can also sign up to Learning Fuzz tier. They both have the construction. It's just that the Student Fuzz tier, you can get more feedback on specific areas, so you can feel free to ask questions, and also you would get a one-on-one online drawing lesson too, so then that way we can actually head on to Zoom and have a chat, and I can kind of take a look at your drawing and kind of give you some tips and advice and some feedback on where you can improve a little bit better with your drawing practice. And there's like plenty more other drawing exercises on there. There's coloring pages, there's hatching practices, there's drawing construction, and I'm just kind of keeping it updated and kind of uploading more different drawing exercises and also painting exercises in the future, just to kind of help you improve your drawing and painting skill. So yeah, awesome. Thank you again so much for watching this brand new video, and this was actually super fun and super exciting to kind of share it. It took a little bit longer to make because generally any of the more fine arts and realistic stuff do tend to take a little bit more time. So, but I was happy that I got the chance to create this special video for you, and I hope this was super helpful for those who would like to learn how to draw a realistic portrait. And there will be more videos like these coming out soon, so come back and check out the next episode next week, because that's going to be part 2 of this video, and I will see you guys next week. So take care, have fun, and I hope you enjoy your wonderful week and enjoy the beautiful weather, because it's getting close to summer. It's still spring though, but it's getting really close to summer. And yeah, happy practicing, have fun drawing, stay creative, and enjoy the rest of your week. I shall catch you guys next time. Okay, see you. Thanks again. Bye.